What is something you didn't anticipate when studying architecture? I didn't anticipate how intense it was going to be, if I'm honest. It's pretty intense. What is going on, ladies and gents? Welcome back to a brand new video. In this video, I'm going to be answering some of the questions that you guys have asked me over on my Instagram. And if you're not following my Instagram, I don't know what you're playing at. Follow me, it's at Tomro Studios, and you can get your questions in. We can do Q&As like this and you can get involved in the videos. So you guys sent in a load of questions, so I'm going to try and answer as many as possible. Got some really good questions. So without further ado, let's dive straight into it. Question number 1. After being debriefed, what's the first step you like to take to start your design process? So personally for me, as soon as I get a brief and the tutor runs it through and explains it and kind of sits us down and talks us through, I then take the brief myself and try and interpret it in my own way. I do that by simply taking a highlighter or a pen and start highlighting specific words or certain types of research, or just generally try and break down the brief by myself so I can understand it further. And this is really important because when you first get a brief, it's vital that you understand the brief and what they're asking of you. And from that point, you can then go off and do some research into any specific things that are required for that brief. And then from that point, you can really build up a body of research that will then help you to move forward with the brief. So for me, at the very early stages of a project, in any type of project, having a load of research to begin with is vital. And personally for me, that's how I work. And a lot of the time, if I'm going to be doing work on anything, I feel like I need to be well versed in it before I even start designing or thinking about how I'm going to turn it into a project. So the first thing I would do is make sure that I know a lot about that topic. I would look at the relevant references or sources that the tutor has provided in the brief, and really understand what is required. From that point, once you've got loads of research, make sure to make lots of notes. I would try and get everything that's in my head down onto paper. This is a common thing that I would do at the start of a project, because a lot of the time when you're doing a lot of research and you start kind of getting some ideas coming to you as you're doing your research, you want to make sure you get them down onto paper so you don't either forget them or you're not sleeping in bed at night thinking, I should do this, I should do that, and obviously losing sleep over it. So make sure to break down the brief yourself and understand it yourself. Do plenty of research. I would encourage you to do weeks of research, 1, 2, 3 weeks of research, and then making notes based on those research and writing down your thoughts and kind of your thinking as you do so. Question number 2, any advice on what to do after undergraduate? Obviously the obvious one is to obviously go and try and get a job, but personally, looking back on my experience, I graduated in lockdown and I was itching to get a job straight away. So the first thing I did was put together a portfolio and basically start applying for jobs. But looking back on it, I've realized that really there is no rush. And if you're someone who financially needs the money there and then I understand to definitely go for a job and try and get into a job as soon as possible. But looking back, because architecture is such a long course, and you'll be doing 3 years and then you'll be working for a year, then you'll be doing your masters, etc., and moving forward, I think sometimes it's key to take a month or 2 off and just have that time to yourself, have that time with your family and friends to be able to celebrate, and kind of step back from architecture only for a few months if that works for you. So after graduating, I would definitely take a break, reset a bit, whether that's 2-3 months, and then come back into applying for a job or thinking about your next steps with like a fresh mindset, and after having a bit of a break from architecture, because it can get relentless. And the problem is, if you keep going and you don't give yourself that time off to reset, you can eventually burn out and you end up putting yourself in a situation where you feel a bit worn out, you feel like you've pushed yourself a bit too much. And looking back on it, I think I should have maybe taken a little bit more time off to enjoy family, friends, etc. Next question, I'm a first year archi student. Should I now focus on manual drafting skills or try to learn softwares? So 100%, if you're in first year, definitely learn manual drafting skills. This is a question that I get asked a lot, and I've spoke about it occasionally, but I think the most important thing in first year is to really understand how a drawing works, how a floor plan works, how a section works, how an elevation works, how a perspective works. And I feel like you can only really learn how these types of drawings work is by doing it yourself by hand, with a piece of paper, with a pen, with a pencil, with a ruler, a scale ruler, and being hands-on in a sketchbook, sketching things out, thinking things through as you're doing it, is the best way to learn those types of skills. And I think when you get into architecture, obviously I understand that it's a profession that is heavily reliant on softwares now, softwares such as Revit, for example, and you get kind of very, very keen to be able to learn those softwares as soon as possible when you get into architecture. But you'll actually realize that learning softwares early on is going to hinder your development, it's going to hinder your creativity. When you come to designing, it's going to prevent you from being more creative, and it's going to restrict you in a lot of ways. And also when you're working in a digital model, you definitely won't really get a grasp of scale or size or how things really truly work, because it's all generating it for you. So if you can learn those things by hand, by sketching them, 100% I would advise it. And then obviously softwares come in a little bit further down the line when you're going into second year, third year, and you want to learn how to maybe be a bit more efficient and learning how to create some more kind of abstract drawings or some more developed drawings, then I would highly recommend that. But definitely for first year, focus on sketching, drawing, learning the basics, and really understanding how these drawings work. How do you deal with missing out on social activities during the semester? I think, seeing as I'm now in my 6th year, I've kind of got used to it. But for me, I always have my eye on the end goal, and that end goal being, currently getting my master's degree, and then eventually, hopefully, becoming an architect. So when I'm sat in my room and I'm working late and I'm not necessarily socializing, I think to myself, there's a purpose for me doing this. I'm not doing it for the sake of it. I'm working towards an end goal. And I think there's a very, very fine balance between overworking yourself and working over hours that you don't need to, and missing out on a lot of social things. But also there's a balance in terms of not seeing and being too sociable. There's obviously a fine balance between the two, which obviously works for people in different ways. If you're someone who's extremely sociable and that is your priority, then you've got to figure out a way of fitting in the work around that. And if you're the other way, where your full priority is working, then you've got to figure out a way to fit in the social things, because it's vital as human beings, as students. We need to socialize, we need to be able to see people, spend time with people outside of architecture, forgetting about architecture, distancing yourself from it at times. That is really important. So actually recently, because I'm quite deep into architecture now, I've been doing it for 6 years, I've now got to a point where I'm getting much better at that balance. I've actually been socializing more this year than I have done, I think, in any other year as an architecture student, because I've understood how efficient I can be, how long things are going to take. I'm a bit more kind of involved when I actually get working. I'm a bit more efficient with it, and you learn over time how to be better with your working and life balance, because it is the most important thing. And I think architecture students, you need to remember that socializing, seeing family, seeing friends is really important, and you shouldn't sacrifice all of those things just for a degree, which could be a controversial thing to say. But what should people do if they are having a hard time executing their concepts and ideas? This is very common, and I think a lot of people normally assume that a concept and an idea just comes to you. And even for me, I've been through long periods of time where I've been scratching my head, banging my head against the wall, trying to figure out what I'm doing. And sometimes it just takes time. And obviously, if you give yourself that time, and if you've got that time, then that's great. But obviously, if you're in a tight schedule where you need to get something going pretty early, then that's where you really need to start kind of figuring out a way of doing that. And some things that I do myself is, like I mentioned, after I do a load of research and a body of research, I try and write down as many things as possible that's going on in my mind, and I try and pick apart the research as best as possible and try and understand different routes and different narratives that I could go down that would inform a design or a concept or an idea. So a lot of my ideas and concepts actually come from the research itself, which is why I think it's really important to place emphasis on that research. But also being able to speak with your tutors, speak with your peers, try and get inspiration from them, which is really important, and I think that's why tutors are there, to ask them for advice. But also sometimes when you've kind of committed to an idea or a concept and you've started developing your project and you get into a point where you're thinking this isn't quite working, sometimes it's healthy just to step back, take a few steps back, maybe come back to the bit where you've done some mind mapping and you're trying to flesh out the concept. Come back and try and figure out kind of where it went wrong or what isn't working on that route. Sometimes it's not about completely restarting, completely resetting, because typically if you've gone for an idea or a concept, then there is some merit to that. In some capacity it will work, but there might be some kind of other tangents from that concept that aren't quite working. So sometimes it's good just to stop what you're doing, take a few steps back, kind of reflect on what kind of paths you went down, why you chose why you decided to go down those specific paths, and maybe reevaluate the kind of task, the brief, the research, and understand where you want to move forward with it. Personally for me, I often literally write down everything that's on my mind and then look at all the different kind of tangents and the different areas of research, and I explore each one ever so slightly, and then once I figure out which one I want to go for, I just go for it and I commit to it. And along the way there's obviously times where you'll realize some things work, some things don't work, and you can just look back at that initial mind map that you've done and move forward in that way. Tips on developing a graphic style through masters. I think this is obviously this will be partly based on your undergraduate work and what you've kind of figured out or what you've developed at undergraduate level to work, and what you think would be best to represent drawings, floor plans, perspectives, visuals, and those kinds of things. And typically when you're going through undergrad, the reason why you do so many projects is because you're testing different ways of drawing, different ways of representing, different ways of communicating a certain idea, and you will eventually build certain skill sets that you think works well for you and your projects. So when I went into masters, I had kind of an idea of the types of drawings that I like and the types of drawings that I find interesting and that I think are successful, and so I started pushing those kind of drawings and that graphic style to be able to communicate my projects. So a lot of it is in terms of your interests, what type of architecture you like, what type of drawings you like, what type of projects that you are interested in, but also how you want to show your personality and your skills through your work. And then very quickly you will figure out a graphic style that kind of represents that. And then going obviously into masters, into first and second year, you kind of hone in on that graphic style. And although the graphic style will change depending on the project, which might be if you're doing a project about film, for example, which is the project I did last year, you will realize that the graphic communication is going to be tilted slightly towards film. Or if you're doing something about photo montage or photography, then the graphic style is going to be more photo montagey. So obviously it depends on the project, what's the best way of communicating it, but also having a bit of your personality in there as well and your interests, which I think is really important. So personally for me, I just love black, whites, greys and red. And so for the past year, my past two portfolios have been black, whites, greys and reds, with sometimes a tint of yellow or blues in there. But just because I like those colours, I like that style, I like drawings that do a similar type of style, and so I've just decided to kind of push that graphic style with my own work. So it's definitely a mix of understanding what you're passionate about and what you actually like to look at, but also what your skills are based in. How to prepare for a review. Well, a good start would be to actually have some work and to work on some work. That would be ideal. Personally, for me, if I'm a week away from a review or a presentation of some sort, I will literally look at what is required for the crit, what is required for the review. Maybe there might be a floor plan, a section, an elevation with a body of research, for example. I would then create a plan or a schedule for the week and say, okay, so by Monday, which is in 7 days time, for example, I need this drawing, this drawing, this drawing, and this drawing. So I'm going to say, right, okay, so for the first 2 days, I'm going to develop my project in Rhino, for example. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to do a floor plan. Thursday, I'm going to do a site plan. So Saturday, I'm going to do an elevation. And then Sunday, I'm going to finalize the presentation. In that way, you've just got a structure for the week to make sure that you're working towards the drawings and the information that you need to show. And then always the night before or the day before my presentation, I try and flesh out a really strong narrative that is going to run through the graphics of the project, of the presentation, but also my verbal communication in terms of what I'm going to be saying, how I'm going to structure what I'm saying, the type of vocabulary that I'm going to be using. And I just do kind of like a rough, maybe like a paragraph, I type up a paragraph of what my thesis is, what the purpose of the presentation is, and then I kind of think through the points that I need to say and how I want to talk through the drawings. So often I actually won't prepare much for my verbal presentation, because sometimes I feel like when I'm writing a script or I'm writing something that is quite detailed, I get quite thrown off in the presentation. It just doesn't work for me. I like to kind of go into a presentation not feeling restricted by things I need to say and just kind of go in for it. But obviously that comes with confidence in your project and also knowing your project really well. Because if you're not very confident in your project, you don't know your project very well, then you're going to struggle to just think of things off the cuff. So for me, it's all about being confident in your work and having a strong narrative. Because if you have a strong narrative based on your research that leads through all the way to your design proposal, then if anyone asks you any questions, you just refer back to your research. You would say, well, based on this research, or I read this thing that informs this, and you've got basically everything to fall back on. And it makes it a little bit easier to direct a project, create a project, and make a presentation that runs smoothly, it makes sense, it's logical, and it has a strong narrative. How did you grow your following? Love the content, by the way. I think this is a really interesting question because I don't often speak about the social media and how I've kind of got to this point. So I actually started the YouTube channel based on fitness, but that's a long conversation. I don't want to go into that. But the way I've built my following essentially is being consistent and showing something that I don't think other people show. So when I started doing architecture content 3 years ago, it was 3 years ago now, I found that there wasn't many people vlogging architecture, and if they were vlogging it, was it high quality? Was it engaging? Was it authentic? Was it relatable? All these things which I felt like I could provide, and I could go into some more detail. And so being consistent, finding a niche in architecture, and also just trying to improve constantly on the content, on the storytelling, on the editing, on the music choice, all these things, I think it's just helped me build a following. And then with Instagram, it's been a slightly different story because that's kind of just blown up in the past year or so. But that was, once again, being consistent in terms of the content that I was showing, being authentic, being relatable, but also producing high quality stuff that people maybe outside of architecture would find entertaining or aesthetic. So a lot of my reels are very aesthetic, and that is the kind of style that I've gone for to try and target a wider audience of just architecture. And so I've tried to tap into the design industry, the creative industry, and just the general person that is going to be flicking through Instagram and wants to see something that looks nice and that sounds nice or whatever. So being consistent, trying to find a niche, but also trying to tap into a wider audience of just architecture, which might contradict the niche part, but I think it's really important to target a niche audience, but then obviously try and expand out in other ways as much as possible. And if you're trying to create a following yourself, I think the important thing is just to start with a good purpose and understanding that you're not just doing it to build a following, but you're doing it to either promote your work or showcase your work, and try and find a job, for example. Or you feel like there's something you can provide that other people aren't providing, or maybe that you could give information, or you've got a certain skill that you feel like you could give off to the world that someone else isn't giving off to. How bad can comparing yourself with your colleagues affect you, and how to stop that? This is obviously a big talking point in architecture. I think it's very, very common for people to compare themselves because we've constantly got crits. We're constantly sat in studio looking at each other's work and thinking, wow, that is some good work. And we're constantly thinking our work needs to be better, because the problem here with architecture, you can keep developing, there's no end point. And so sometimes it feels like it could just be endless and you think this could be better. But in comparing yourself to others, there's healthy ways to do it, but then there's obviously unhealthy ways. The healthy way is to look at what other people are doing and be inspired by it and think, wow, that is really nice. I want to know how they've done that, and maybe I could use that in some capacity in my own work. Or maybe they're using a software that is really specific to what they're doing and you want to use that software yourself. Or maybe there's a certain graphic style that you think is really good in terms of telling the story of their project, and maybe you want to develop something that is really kind of strong in telling the story of your concept. So I think the important thing is to not look at them and think, oh my word, they've got loads of work, I need to have loads of work, for example. It just needs to be a fact of, you look at them, you think, right, their work is great, I want to be also proud of my work, and I also want to have really good work. So I'm gonna push myself now because I'm really inspired by that work. And obviously that isn't easy, because it's human nature to compare yourself and think, oh gosh, theirs is way better than mine, for example. But I think it's important to stay on your own path, because everyone's projects are different, everyone's graphic styles are different, and so you just need to be able to motivate yourself and inspire yourself to keep pushing forward. And I think the way to stop comparing yourself with people is just to feel more confident in your own work and your own ability. If you have certain skills that you think are really strong, then push those skills and be really confident in those skills, and not let other people's work or what other people say kind of damage that confidence or bring you down. Because if you know you're good at something and you know what you're doing is right, then stick by it and be confident in it. Premier League predictions. Well, if you guys didn't know, I'm an Arsenal fan, so Arsenal are going to win the league. Man City are going to finish second, Man United third, Newcastle fourth. That's my predictions. What is something you didn't anticipate when studying architecture? I didn't anticipate how intense it was going to be, if I'm honest. It's pretty intense. It's a lot to take on. The balance between work and life is quite difficult. And yeah, that was definitely a bit of a shock going into architecture. What is the most rewarding thing about architecture? I think the most rewarding thing is getting to a crit, getting into a presentation, pinning up your work, presenting your work, feeling like, yeah, that went really well. Knowing that you really liked the work and that you were really happy with what you've done. And then you can walk away, you can go see your family, you can go see your friends, and just celebrate that moment. Because for a lot of the time we're sat in our desks at our rooms or in studio for hours and hours on end. We're sat there working, and often you don't see the end goal because you've still got 2-3 months till submission. And it's in those moments where you pin up the work, you look at it, you kind of stand back and you realize, yeah, I've done a lot of work and this work is really good. I think that's the most rewarding thing for sure. And especially the end of year degree show, when you see everyone's work pinned up around the studio and you see how amazing everyone's done. And it's one of the first times in the year that you actually get to see everyone's work, and you can walk around, you can talk with people, you can celebrate. That is really rewarding. Final question, how did your final year dissertation go? So if you haven't seen the dissertation vlog, I would definitely recommend it. because I'm dyslexic, the dissertation wasn't easy for me at all. Reading and writing has never been easy for me. It's always been a struggle. But actually, my dissertation, I hope went well. I haven't got any results yet. I don't know how I've done, but fingers crossed. I mean, I'm pretty happy and I'm confident in what I've done. Even if I get a bad grade, I'll still look back and reflect on it being a good time, and I think I put in some really good work, and I think I'm really proud of it, which I think is the most important thing. But it was quite hard to constantly push yourself to write a lot of words on a weekly basis and read a lot of words on a weekly basis, and being able to jump from your design project to your dissertation and jump between them on a weekly basis was really difficult, because it requires a different thinking and a different skill to be able to go from reading and writing to the next day you're designing to reading and writing. It wasn't easy, it was quite tough, but overall I think I'm really proud of what I did. It's definitely the best thing I've ever written, for sure, and I just hope the grade reflects that. But I won't find out my grade for a while, so I'll keep you guys updated. And that is all the questions for today. Thank you so much for getting involved in the Q&A. Thank you for sending in your amazing questions. I'm sorry that I couldn't get through everyone's questions, but there was literally like 100 questions I couldn't have got through. So yeah, thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, please smash the thumbs up button. Make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you next time. Peace.